What is happening, my cool people? My name is Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel. So once again, Dracula comes back and this dude just doesn't get the hint. Like seriously, it's unbelievable how this guy's just not getting this. So you know what? Enough games anymore. We're gonna have to smack this dude up one more time. And the way we're gonna do this is by going into another game that's in the series Castlevania, specifically Castlevania Bloodlines for the SEGA Genesis. So nothing fancy, nothing crazy. Let's just dive into this. This is Castlevania Bloodlines. Castlevania Bloodlines was released worldwide for the SEGA Genesis in 1994. Funny enough, the title was changed for Europe to Castlevania The New Generation, mainly because of the harsh censorship that was going on back then. Apparently, Europe didn't like the use of the word blood in the title, so they made Konami change it. Sounds very silly, I know. Anyway, the game's story takes place years after Simon Belmont destroyed Dracula in the previous Castlevania games, with the plot of this game taking place in 1917. Though the Belmont clan restored peace after defeating Dracula, an evil woman named Elizabeth Bartley plans to resurrect Dracula after the start of the First World War in Europe. The crazy part here? Elizabeth Bartley is the niece of Count Dracula. I know, pretty nuts, am I right? It's then up to a pair of vampire hunters named John Morris and Eric Lacarde, both of which have a real grudge against Elizabeth. John is a descendant of the Belmont clan, while Eric vows revenge for his girlfriend that was turned into a vampire once Elizabeth had awakened. Within the timeline of the Castlevania series, Bloodlines is an interesting entry, being another game that doesn't focus on a specific Belmont. The game has multiple endings by the time you finish it between both characters, but pretty much has the same conclusion by the end. But does it bring the series into the 16-bit era with grace? You'll be happy to know that it does, but it also stands uniquely amongst the rest of the series. Now, I'm actually a big fan of how the story of this game doesn't really focus on a Belmont character. It's kind of an offshoot of the Belmont clan, like a distant relative, but it also fills in a gap that happens between the NES games and also eventually what we got on the PlayStation, kind of like a side story that fills in little gaps of time. I also find it very interesting that this is the only Castlevania game that we got on the SEGA Genesis / Mega Drive. It's very interesting because the Super Nintendo got two Castlevania games with Super Castlevania 4 and Dracula X Chronicles, but we only managed to get one, and I feel like that's all we really needed. Everything about this game, including the visuals, the gameplay, the sounds, and a lot of other different elements that are specifically Castlevania, feel like a natural evolution from the NES 8-bit era into the 16-bit era here on the Genesis. And to me, I really enjoy everything coming together so well. But nonetheless, the game still manages to add new elements to the Castlevania formula, including having two playable characters, which I think is very cool, having a new antagonist, which still is kind of working for Dracula in some way, and also just the different types of stuff they do with the visuals. But aside from all that, let's talk about the most important part of a Castlevania game, and that's the gameplay, which in this game is actually kind of cool. Castlevania Bloodlines is a steady evolution of the NES gameplay into the 16-bit generation without fundamentally changing things up. Unlike Super Castlevania 4 on the Super Nintendo, Bloodlines does its best to make the gameplay feel exactly like the old games, but still have enough new stuff to be different. You have a primary weapon and sub-weapons to use like before, which seems pretty standard for the series up to this point. If you're like me and played the other games beforehand, all of this will sound very familiar to you already. Similar to older Castlevania games on NES, you can increase the power of your main weapon by collecting power-ups that you get from hitting candles, which can boost up to 3 levels of your weapon for both characters. The final boost is the strongest and changes the look of your weapon, but if you get hit, you'll revert back to the second version of that weapon. If I'm being honest here about this is a little stupid. I'm gonna get hit at some point within a stage, so I hardly get to use the final power-up, which is a shame if I manage to survive the entire time without dying. Castlevania Bloodlines has 2 characters you could choose between at the very start of the game, both John and Eric. The 2 of them go through the exact same levels, but they have their own types of weapons and attacks. John uses the Vampire Killer Whip despite not being a full Belmont, and has all of the same attacks that you would expect to see in a Castlevania game. Eric, on the other hand, uses the Alucard Spear, which has a longer reach than the whip and allows him to jump very high. There is a difference in some of the paths that you take within each stage, but not by much. John can use his whip to swing over gaps and reach new areas, while Eric can use his high jump to reach new paths towards the end of a stage. Ultimately, however, you'll end up at the same boss fights regardless of who you choose to play with, and the same conclusion at the end. I wish there was a lot more differences beyond this, however, depending on who you got to play with at the very beginning of the game. At least give me some more variations of the sub-weapons I could use. That would have been very cool. I feel like there was also a missed opportunity here to add even more replay value to the game. We could have had different bosses, more unique obstacles, and even a few unique stages for both characters. But I get how things have to be similar because of the story and the limitations of the consoles, however there could have been a lot more cool stuff done here. It really does feel like there was a lot of missed opportunity here for some variation and also to add a lot of replay value into Castlevania Bloodlines. Just imagine, right? Imagine having a whole bunch of different sub-weapons between both John and Eric. It just would have been really cool just to have them play different ways, but even beyond that, having different bosses, having different stages, having variations of the bosses you already fight, like just because of whatever particular character that you're actually battling with, it just would have been really cool to see stuff like that. There could have been a bunch of different things that the people that made this game could have pulled from the entire Castlevania series up to that point. Granted, there is a lot of fan service in here, not just with the music and some of the visuals and such, but still, I feel like they could have injected a whole bunch of extra stuff. If this game ever gets remade someday, I would love to see something like that done. But outside of all that, I do have to say that some of the special moves or the more unique moves between John and Eric feel like they could have been a little bit much more useful. They felt kind of useless unless they were absolutely necessary to use. For example, I feel like you do that with John more often in his gameplay as opposed to Eric's. Eric's like high jump is pretty cool, but it doesn't really have all its uses as often as John does. The other thing I do want to comment on is the bosses, which some of them are very easy, some of them are very difficult. They get a lot more difficult as you get towards the end, and I'm also not a big fan of the boss gauntlet at the very last stage. I'm not a fan of stuff like that. I've talked about that in regards to the Castlevania series in the past, but even so, specifically with Castlevania Bloodlines, I feel like the boss gauntlet was completely unneeded. I would have rather just gone and fought Dracula or fought Elizabeth herself at that point right after I finished with death. Even that whole boss fight itself just felt kind of thrown in there, kind of like shoehorned in some way. But even so, just at least what we got, it could have been done a little bit better. One other thing I do want to comment on is that some of the special effects and the stages that you're traversing kind of get in the way of the gameplay itself. They kind of make it a little bit hard to see certain things. I believe it's the second to last stage of the game where you actually have these weird special effects that's kind of like, you know, you're going through dimensions in different spaces, and it kind of messes around with the way that you're seeing some of your jumps and trying to judge going over certain platforms or reaching certain areas. To me, that became a real big hindrance, and it became more annoying than anything else rather than cool. It doesn't happen a lot throughout the entirety of the game, but when it does happen, it does get a little bit frustrating, and I wish they could have probably, you know, adjusted things a little bit better in order to make the actual area of that stage flow a little bit better. But now let's talk about my favorite aspect of the Castlevania series, and that's the music. And once again, like every other entry in the series that we've talked about up to this point, there's at least a couple good tracks that I want to touch on. It's just, Castlevania music is just so much fun. Okay now, so how does the music of Castlevania Bloodlines stack up? I'm gonna be real with all of you here, the music is very good and in my personal opinion, much better than Super Castlevania 4. Seriously, I'm not kidding. I feel like the Genesis music in this case is much better overall. There aren't a lot of remixed classic tracks in this game compared to other games, and yet the original music in here is really good. The best track is by far the first stage when you enter the castle ruins. It's the one that sounds the best and stands out from the rest of the entire soundtrack. Listen to it here for a little bit and you'll see exactly what I mean. I really like how it sounds in here overall. I'm telling you guys, there's some good bangers in this game, and it's surprising too because the original music of Castlevania Bloodlines overshadows some of the classic remix tracks in here, and that's pretty freaking cool. I've always said that the Castlevania music is probably some of the best video game music out there. You can get tracks from like every single one of the games and make like a greatest hit album that'll possibly be the best video game soundtrack ever released. Forgetting about that, however, staying focused on Castlevania Bloodlines, the first track that you get in the very first stage is the absolute best to me. That's the particular music track that defines this entire game. But also surprising enough, the remix tracks that are included in this game are stuff like Simon's theme from Super Castlevania 4. Surprisingly enough, you don't hear Vampire Killer, you don't hear like Bloodlines and stuff, which apparently they're in the game, but you have to use a certain code to unlock them or at least have them play when you're not getting that special power-up as you're traversing each stage. To me, that's a little bit weird, especially since Vampire Killer is like the defining track of the entire Castlevania series. That's a weird choice to me. But even so, I enjoy all the music in Castlevania Bloodlines. I think all the tracks sound great. They're very Genesis sounding tracks, even though some are better than others, but just overall as an entire OST, it just sounds really freaking good on the SEGA Genesis, and I would stack it up to some of the other Castlevania games we've played on this channel up till now. So if you guys couldn't already tell by now, can I recommend that you guys pick up Castlevania Bloodlines when you can? Without a shadow of a doubt, hell yes. I feel like this game has held up very well throughout the years. It provides not only fun and challenging gameplay, has great visuals in 16-bit, but also a cool soundtrack and other little things like multiple endings. There's a lot to love about this game. Funny enough, Castlevania Bloodlines is one of the few Castlevania games that hasn't really been getting a lot of re-releases up until recently. You guys could pick it up in the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, as well as also play it on the SEGA Genesis Mini when that console comes out. It's kind of cool to see this game get a little bit more love now these days. If you guys want a good entry point into the Castlevania series and you want to see some of its best elements and really enjoy some of the cooler aspects of Castlevania, this is a great choice to go with. Even though it's not a mainline entry starring a Belmont character and all this other stuff, I still think like it's great for newcomers that know nothing about Castlevania. It's still very fun to play through. And there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts on Castlevania Bloodlines for the Genesis. I think it's a fun game. I think you guys should check it out when you can. And once again, we have to smack up Dracula a few more times, so hopefully that fool gets the hint. Even though I'm pretty sure he's not going to get the hint, and we'll be back to smack him up a few more times afterwards. But those are just my thoughts about the game. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments section down below. Tell me, do you enjoy Castlevania Bloodlines? Do you have another favorite Castlevania game? Did you smack up Dracula alongside with us? Put it all in the comments section down below. And of course, don't forget to leave a like on this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos just like this one, and also don't forget I am on Patreon. For the $1 level or higher, you guys get a bunch of exclusive content, early access to my new videos, and a whole bunch of other great stuff I know you guys are going to love. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys. I will talk to all of you again very soon. Peace out, and stay epic, everybody. Thanks for watching this video, everyone. Make sure you guys check out some of these other videos in the boxes after the credits, and don't forget to visit my Patreon page via the annotations for more exclusive content. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well. Peace out, and stay epic, everybody.